As the world watches and listens in horror, the peaceful pro-democracy demonstration in China comes to a violent and bloody end. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
There is another very important phase of warfare. It has as its target not the body, but the mind of the enemy.
Target psychological warfare is against the enemy's mind.
It is words and ideas.
Ammunition used to fire.
Its mission is to influence the thoughts of the enemy soldier, and at the same time
is expected and encouraged to study foreign languages and the social sciences such as history, economics, and sociology. He must have a broad and sympathetic understanding of all phases of human experience.
Use of this force as an integral part of combat has now taken on new form.
Hey, Inspired Tribe, my fellow freedom lovers. It's John Nolan here. Thank you so much for tuning in. It is Wednesday, August 13th, 2025. Out of the Matrix into Prime Reality. Thank you for joining us on X, Rumble, and YouTube. Thank you to our wonderful moderators, Ronnie and Two Steps Behind, a.k.a. Raymond, for your fantastic work. And, of course, my wonderful wife, Christine, as inspired in the live chat. It's good to see you all. There's a lot of noise in the world today. So our show aims to focus on the signal. What is actually important? What should we know? What do we need to remember? What do we need to remind ourselves of? And so when we look at the signals, today I would like to talk about the 5 biggest lies in history, which are also the 5 biggest psyops in human history, that have allowed for centuries and millennia of great deception, and that are basically at the foundation of all psyops that are playing out today. By the way, this video in the intro is literally the official Army for Psyop group recruitment video that they put out a few years ago, official Army video. We did change the music for copyright reasons, but other than that, everything you saw is exactly as they put it out. We put the link in the description so you can go and actually watch. It's the Army's video. We're everywhere, is what they say. We are whispering, we are changing, we are all the world's a stage. And the truth is that in today's world, and even in the conspiracy, truth, freedom arena, most people are only just beginning to research and find out what psyops, psychological operations, are. They've been here all along. That was always the biggest part of warfare, was psychological warfare. Sun Tzu is the art of war. It's all psychology. It's all mind games. It's all occupying the enemy's mind. And so let's dive into these 5 big lies that make everything else possible. This is highly shareable, and I encourage you to do so, because people might wake up when they see this for what it is. Okay, let's dive into it, friends. What do we got here today? There we go. So this is when we want to know how we landed here, we need to understand that something happened a very long time ago, which was the divine right and sacred hierarchy psyop. So basically, this was a time where it was introduced to the human family that certain people, were chosen by God or by the gods, by some universal principle or law or rule, and certain people were chosen to rule over the rest of the people. Those were pharaohs and kings and emperors and popes and presidents and prime ministers and everything in between. And because of this incredibly sophisticated narrative, it also became unquestionable. Who are you to question God's will? God wants this man to be the king. Why? Well, because God gave this woman, the king's mother, the king as a gift. Clearly now, because she was a queen, now he will become the king. You can't question that. God anointed, appointed, and approved the emperor, the king, the ruler. And what that did is it institutionalized these mechanisms. It institutionalized religion, as people looked at religion and monarchies as sort of their everything. Everything that they needed had to come from there. The approval that they needed, the permission that they needed, the direction in which they needed to go. But it wasn't always like that. We used to be a self-directed people. We used to be people that didn't take orders from others, that didn't take shit from others. So what this is, the impact is that over centuries, we became conditioned. And we have talked about this. Actually, there's an expression in our genes, people call it the worship gene, that sort of supports this, and there's a cycle here. So when behavior is repeated over and over and over again, it actually starts to encode in our genes, in our DNA, and it starts to express that way. There's a potential for that. Another theory is that this particular gene was added or altered in a way that it would make us more susceptible to authority. So what that did is that it created this perception that obedience is a virtue, right? That if we follow the rules, that is integrity. If we follow the authority, whether that's our preacher, our pope, our president, if we follow their authority, then that is integrity. That is virtue. And so we reward people who do that, and we punish people who don't do that. And it is to this day. Think of the narratives of the last years. Think of how often presidents and God were put in the same sentence, how this is all appointed and anointed. It's the same thing as with kings, and this is now playing out again. But now we're moving into the new era of sacred hierarchy, where the AI is going to take that place. So the AI is going to be the one, the God, if you will, that people listen to and that they accept as authority over them. And that is a psyop that's been playing out for many, many years. 5,000 years as far as we can look back, from ancient Sumer to constitutional monarchies that are still in place, by the way. And even so-called democracies function in that way. The basic principle has not changed. The reason why this is so important to understand is because hierarchy in and of itself, and authority, our belief in authority, which fundamentally means that we as societies accept that other humans have more rights, not just in general, but more rights over us than we do. So they have more authority and permission to rule, but to dictate to us, even against our own principles, our own values, our own decisions. And we accept that. We accept that at so many points in life, that others have authority over us, where there's absolutely no necessity for it to be so, other than it is programmed now into us. So one of the biggest, the number one biggest psyop that has allowed for the control system to stay in charge for thousands and thousands of years is the divine right and sacred hierarchy psyop. Okay, so if you understand that, if you understand it as a program, I don't care how many scripture passages you quote. Well, guess what? Wouldn't it favor the current structure to have those passages in there? Wouldn't it favor to put that in writing? Wouldn't it favor the system to have it everywhere? So when you question it, they go, but it says in the Bible, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Give to God what is God's. Authority, authority, authority. And where does that lead us, by the way, once we leave this avatar? That we will once again, most people accept another authoritative figure that decides and chooses and gives permission or takes it away, whether you should do this or that, or give strong suggestions as to where you should go next, which is usually back here. Okay, so this is the number one. The number two is the scarcity and debt psyop. And the core narrative there is that resources are inherently scarce, not limited, but scarce. Is a completely different story. So we could argue that certain resources, at least the way that we can see them, are limited. That might even be questionable. You know, there are these theories out there that say that, for example, oil is constantly being reproduced. Now, given the astronomical consumption, that is not hard to believe, but let's just stick with that for a moment. But scarce means there's very little of it. And that is not true. That is not true for every, even at the numbers that they have given us, for 8 billion people, 10 billion people, 15 billion people, there wouldn't be a problem, any problem of scarcity of resources, but it is a great story. And the story then says that we have to fight with each other, compete with each other, go into debt to purchase the scarce resources from the people who own them. Who owns them? Who owns nature? Who owns water? Who owns food? Who owns land? This is part of the psyop, part of the program is that we believe this way. And so when money came into play, you know, it used to be at least gold and silver as the real hard money, but then money came into play, which was first a representation of that gold and silver. So basically those were just notes that represented the gold and silver that was stored somewhere. And you know, official history tells us this is because people didn't want to carry around the gold and the silver anymore, so they just made paper notes. Well, the paper notes today are not backed by anything. We know that it's fiat money, other than what? The faith and credit, right? The faith and credit, our faith in it, and we as the debt slaves who are guaranteeing the repayment of that. So this system is once again built on scarcity, compound interest. So in other words, here's what really happens. You go to the bank, you ask for a loan. That money didn't exist before. Banks are by law prohibited from lending money that they hold. Let that sink in. Let me tell you again. Banks are prohibited by law to loan out money that they hold. So they can't go into someone's savings account and lend it to you at interest. That is against the law. They can, based on those savings, create new money out of thin air based only on your promise to repay it. But if you take a loan of $100,000, you don't promise to repay $100,000. You promise to repay $100,000 plus interest, which wasn't created in the loan, which you now have to find somewhere else in the world to repay. And that is the modern monetary representation of scarcity, of artificial scarcity. So the system was created to create a perpetual cycle of dependence. And it can only function if we believe in scarcity and that we don't have access to the natural and universal abundance that we're actually created from. And this was one of the biggest tools. You have to think about that. Think about maybe 50, 60, 70 years back. So 50, 60, 70 years back, everyone who had a backyard had a few fruit trees, had a little bit of a garden. Wherever there was land, there were orchards. That was normal. Everybody had it. Can you imagine the kind of psychological operation what it takes to convince people to cut down their trees where their apples and their peaches and their cherries and everything else came from? Cut down their trees, replace them with ornamental trees or just hyper fertilized and pesticide ridden lawns, and work harder to make more money, to go into a store to buy things that barely resemble food from places they've never been, grown by people they've never met, and full of toxins they have no idea about, and put that into their body instead. Can you imagine what kind of psychological operation it took? But it succeeded because most people still that own land, whether that's half an acre or 15 acres, no fruit trees, no orchards, no gardens. It's getting better finally in the last years. It's finally getting better. But can you imagine the psyop that took? The psyop, the programming that took. This has been out there. Scarcity and debt psyop. It's something that most people believe in. They don't like it. They feel burdened by it, but they believe in it. So we had to be programmed to bring up every child that is born, every baby that is born, to bring them up in the belief that everything is scarce and hard to get, and that you need to work hard just to survive. What did that do too? It took out of us this natural inner knowing that if we are in this world, clearly we must have a space to live. No bird ever wonders if they have permission or need to pay rent to the tree to build a nest in the branches. The birds don't wonder that. No animal does, because it's their space. It's what it was created for. But we, as humans, we don't. We have to literally purchase the very land that we're born onto to have a place to live, or rent it, or both. Most people do both because they pay property taxes. So that's purchase and rent. And that is a psyop. That is a program. If we understand it, we can begin to deprogram from it. The third big one, this keeps us from understanding it on a larger scale, is the divide and conquer psyop. So what does that mean? The core narrative here is that your greatest threat is the other, the person that looks different, the person that speaks different, that has a different belief, different party, different sexuality. And so we have been divided into these million little boxes so that we keep fighting each other over sports teams. I mean, look at the UK hooligan culture. I mean, it's quite insane, but it's life or death. Over what? Over my soccer team, over your soccer team. Wow, that seems like a worthy cause to fight over. But then if we don't have that, we still have a million other little causes to fight over. Am I a fan of this brand or that brand? Am I a Chevy or a Ford guy? Pepsi or Coke, Republican or Democrat, all these little groups that we could be in. And this is one of the most successful ones, this psyop, because all these groups usually become echo chambers which is great for them, for anyone who wishes to control, because when you're in an echo chamber, you don't hear other voices anymore. You don't consider other voices anymore. And other voices are getting delegitimized and even dehumanized because they think differently. They're not human any longer. They're idiots. They're lip-tarts and MAGA fascists, or whatever they're called. And so what that does is it keeps us fighting amongst each other, never even consider in a larger group that who benefits, who keeps doing that, who runs the media, the psyops, so to speak, to do that. And that has started with, it didn't used to be like that, but it started with making us different. I wholeheartedly have a knowing that there was a time when even as we shared language, which language was already a part of the psyop, but it was one language. We shared one tongue. And so we understood each other. We could comprehend the words. But before that, there was telepathy, no need for language, which was even clearer. There was no, confusion there. But language created that. And then multiple languages, and now hundreds and thousands of languages, not including different dialects, where you go from one place to another, still the same language, but the dialects are so different. And then you have ethnicities, religions. You have, of course, nations now, and borders, and all of that, which creates division groups amongst people. So we never unify. To see that if we were to unify, none of us in this group are really the enemy. That would make it very clear very quickly. This has literally existed as far back as we could go in the beginnings of language, of the written word, of the beginnings of structured countries, empires, where this began to be the norm. Before that, there was a unified earth culture at one point. And prime reality is what I call it. There was an earth culture where people lived by the truth. And so there was no confusion around this. And we still have cellular or DNA memory, whatever you want to call it, or even soul memory of that. Some of us have, and we can remember it. And that's why we can see the deceptions a little bit clearer. The fourth psyop, which again, they are all intertwined and they need to be intertwined, otherwise it doesn't work, is the knowledge and gatekeeping psyop, which meant that the knowledge that used to be in all people and the wisdom on how to live, how to be, who we are, where we came from, our true essence, all of that, how we create, that knowledge was slowly and surely removed from the people over generations, right? You can't do this very fast. The most recent example that we can find that maybe clarifies this is what happened here among the Indians in America, where that knowledge, existed in some places up until 150 years ago, very intact, very clearly. But the enemy that came in, again, this was, yes, there was physical warfare, but more importantly, it was the warfare against the knowledge, the wisdom, and on the mind. So they needed to do a number of things. Remove the children from the elders, so there's no more contact there, so that knowledge can be passed on. Since the Indians didn't use written language, they did it all orally through storytelling and life experience and ceremony and all of these things. So then that happened. Then the language was forbidden. Then the traditions were forbidden. Then the medicine men and women were forbidden. Then the religious expressions were forbidden. And this lasted into the 80s. In 1980s, it was still against the law in the United States to practice their religion and their ceremony and their medicine. You got to think about that. But that is how dangerous a continuous chain of knowledge and wisdom through multiple generations can be to any power structure. That's the power of transferring an entire way of life from one generation to another to the next. It stays intact. It stays lived. It's a practical reality over a theoretical one. And so the psyop was, and it started, of course, much sooner, is to remove all knowledge that is essential to realizing what our true powers are, who we really are. Remove that and keep it among a very small elite in secret societies and secret groups, removed from everything mainstream. The Vatican Library comes to mind, which still to this day seems to be a gold mine. There are Tibetan hidden libraries in the Himalayas in general. There's a lot of knowledge there. But even in our Western world, it's all among us, but it is kept within these secret groups. This is, one of the big ones that shows how this works is the Freemasons, where the Masons have the lower degrees, and then basically the knowledge increases and the contextual knowledge. So what they know and what it really means and how it really connects, it gets clearer and clearer the higher up you go. And then at some point, basically the entire narrative below flips. It's basically upside down when you get to the highest levels. And then the truth, so to speak, is revealed only to the initiates on those levels. They're the only ones who know, and they know the principles, they know the rules, they know how it works. And all that has been kept from the people. So the people are reduced to fairly, I'm sorry, on a mass scale, fairly stupid consumers and workers, right? That was what they needed. They needed workers, and then they needed consumers, and they needed them to be fairly dumb. So this is why the knowledge was destroyed. This is why every power that comes in, one of the first things that the new emperor does, the new king does, is make sure that the information sphere is in control. Make sure that education and knowledge is moving in a certain direction. Other things are not allowed. Okay. So this is what disconnected us from having true history. And how do you prove that? How many of you even know, and that includes us, by the way, how many of you even know the history of your own family? How many of you know anything about your ancestors that's further back than your great-grandparents? I'm seriously asking, what do you know about 3-4 generations back in your family? Who were they? What did they do? What did they love? What were their lives about? Where did they work? Like where did they live exactly? How did they raise their children? We don't know these things. So we don't even know our family history, let alone history at large or knowledge at large. And that's by design. So we don't have historic knowledge. We have psywar or psyop knowledge, that which we're allowed to know. And it's usually not the truth, or so heavily distorted that, it doesn't even resemble the truth. And this has been going on for a very long time. The written word really is being used against us, if you think about it. The written word was the end of oral traditions. So as soon as books became the main source for knowledge, who was able to write books and print books and distribute books? That was a very small number of people. But once that was established in people's minds, it stopped that, your family and your village and your people would transfer a whole body of knowledge to you, because it was then deemed that comes from books, that comes from the church, that comes from the king. Huge psyop that still runs and still allows for all the others to work today. And then we have the materialist reductionist psyop, which basically, once you've gone through all the other ones, you can convince people that they are flesh and bones, that they are this physical appearance, and that if they even dare to think about consciousness, that it is a product of brain activity and brain chemistry, and that consciousness sits between the ears, and that basically we are living in a material physical world, and our main objective is survival in this physical material world. And that began when science took over, specifically state-backed science, and where scientists became gods, and they started to question, because they picked people who didn't understand to begin with spirituality, so they questioned it, and then they ridiculed it, and then they eliminated it from the equation altogether. Metaphysical stuff, spiritual stuff, the truth about who we actually are, all that was was eliminated, and what we were left with was an understanding of anatomy, which is, by the way, also very, very limited. I mean, even their fields of specialty, there's still morons in those fields and still don't understand those fields. It's idiotic. The way that most mainstream scientific fields operate, it is changing, and there's wonderful people in there. But the standards, how they're set and how they're applied and how they're enforced, is moronic, idiotic, and evil. And there's no two ways about that. So that has disconnected us again from all metaphysical aspects. Once you start to say that prayer, meditation, introspection, all those things are woo-woo and they're out there, and really what we need to focus on is our blood level, our blood pressure and our sugar levels, and simply physical things, that leads us to today, where we have a disconnection from nature, where we don't hear our inner rhythm. We're not aligned with the rhythms of nature, circadian rhythms and many others. You see that, women that have a regular cycle and that have that usually was aligned with natural processes, all of that is out of balance, out of rhythm. And so we are then so out of whack that we can be introduced to the idea that we need to be constantly manipulated by chemicals that we put into our bodies through pills and medicine and devices, and now genetic manipulation, CRISPR technologies, and AI interventions. And that is because we are in a reductionist world. We don't, collectively speaking, we don't acknowledge, accept, and embody our divinity, our ability to transcend limitations as we perceive them today. We do not seek higher connection to a higher part of ourselves or a higher part of creation. And we seek the solutions that come in bottles, in computers, and from people in white coats. And that is a massive psyop that was really developed, perfected over the last 300 years. It has existed before, but it was perfected. And here we are living with these 5, and there's others, but 5 fundamental lies, psychological operations that are now hardwired and programmed into our systems. And the only way to transcend them is to become aware of them. Because if you go out and if you go down all the rabbit holes and how they work and who's involved and who rules over whom and who is in this conspiracy and in that conspiracy, it all boils down to the basic programming of these 5 lies. Because we believe these things, collectively speaking, we can be manipulated in all these directions. Once we deprogram from that, it's a whole different story. That's the fear. So this is why I say signal, not noise, which means focus on the knowables. What can you know? How can you verify the things that I just shared with you? Use your logic and common sense. Observe the world. This can be fully understood with logic and common sense. You can see these patterns everywhere. You can see that they don't serve us. Who is putting so much energy into keeping them alive? And whom do they serve? This is literally critical, logical thinking. You don't need to be a researcher or a scientist to figure that one out. So the signal is going through every layer of your programming and then finding sort of the mistakes in it. What is wrong about this? Whom does it serve? Is this what I really believe? Is this what I want to believe? Does this serve me? Does it help me expand or contract? Do I live in love or in fear? Am I a reactor or a creator? All of these questions need to be answered, and then transcending those programs and living with free thought and free choice. This is what these programs prohibit. Like I'm telling you, I can't tell you how often people feel so good about themselves and so virtuous for being obedient, for just saying yes and being a really, really good yes sayer, even when they mean to say no. Or, how often people will say, well, that's just the way it is. Well, don't you think it's strange that a conglomerate of private banks issues currency and that your government needs to borrow that currency from a conglomerate of private banks and pay interest on it, which means you borrow and pay interest on it, which means your children and grandchildren are debt slaves to that conglomerate of private banks? That doesn't seem at all odd to you? Doesn't seem at all strange or something that we should maybe consider changing? Well, that's just the way it is. And that's if you get to the point where they even understand it. Most people have no earthly idea where money comes from. They used to say from the ATM or from the bank, and now it's from a click on their phone. So there's not much there. But for those who are questioning, for those who are researching, for those who are going down rabbit holes, you can get lost in that without ever seeing the essential, the signal. The signal is what is really at the core of this, why is it happening, and what can I do about it? Okay? What is at the core? Why is it happening? And what can I do about it? Everything else is just bullshit. This is the time that we're in, is where we need to find the signals and then act on them. Change the way that we need to change. And knowledge is only powerful when it is applied. So knowledge is not power. Applied knowledge is power. Knowledge in and of itself is just using a bandwidth. You need to apply it. So when you go back, screenshot this, bookmark this video, come back to it, think critically, ask yourself, where am I running on these programs without realizing it? Where am I giving away my power? Where is my belief still connected to that psyop here? How could people believe in scarcity? Have you ever been in a national park in the woods? Well, try to count the trees. Try to count the plants. Try to count the fruits. And then try to count the seeds in the fruits. You can count the seeds in the fruit, but you can't count the fruits on the seed. One singular seed is going to produce an infinity of new fruits. One single seed. So where's the scarcity, folks? There is no scarcity. It's a psyop. We can't know things. I don't know this. Could there be another way than books? Could we actually meditate, connect, pray, go into deeper spheres, and then connect with the field where all information is and read in the field like you were to read in a book? Can you do that? Yes, you can. Can you go beyond the idea that you're just a physical body, just blood and bones and muscles? And then if that is true, what is it that we sense after somebody passes away? What is it that communicates back with us? What is it that actually makes us feel something? So we take power back by discontinuing to believe in the lies that we were told for thousands of years. We stop acquiescing to the lie and start living by the truth. It's literally that simple. I'm not saying it's easy. It's simple. And these are the signals of our time. And I'm going to say this a lot. We're going to talk a lot about signals and noise. There's an incredible amount of noise, and it's only there to distract you. That's the psyop. That's the psy war. Keep you not focused on what matters. So you need to have a clear priority list. What is it that my aim is? Mine is become the best possible version of myself, because that's what I have full control over. And my practices do what I can with what I have where I am. So if that is your goal too, you have to make a priority list. What does that mean? Which areas of my life am I starting with? What is the first thing that I want to focus on? And then begin to envision what life is like when you embody that. What is life like when you don't subscribe to any of these 5 lies any longer, but you live the truth? You can't do both. It's cognitive dissonance, it's schizophrenia. It doesn't work. You have to commit to the truth and then watch what happens. Watch what happens. And here's the thing. People say to me, but this is not a psyop. It's the truth. I've experienced this all my life. Well, have you ever stopped and thought that you experienced it because you believe in it? And because by virtue of how reality works and reflects things back to us, we must experience what we believe in. We must constantly get confirmation for our innermost and most dearly held beliefs. Well, then sure, then you're always right. You know, you think there's great scarcity in the world and you can't ever have more than enough. Yeah, you're right, if that's what you believe. But then your neighbor believes wholeheartedly that she is in the flow of life and in the flow of eternal abundance, and everything always comes to her in overflowing ways, never lacks a thing, always experience the full abundance of life. And I go, yeah, she's right. She believes in that. She lives it. You believe in this. You live this. Well, new choices. It's all about new choices, all about different choices. So when was the best time to make a new choice? 20 years ago? What's the second best time? Today. Today. It's just like planting a tree. Best time was 20 years ago. Second best time is today. So signal, not noise. Control the controllables. Focus on that which is right in front of you and watch your life transform. Because that's why you're here. You wouldn't be watching this. You wouldn't be interested in this if you didn't have a deep desire to transform things in your life and help the collective. That's why we're all here. So let's not just talk about it. Let's do it. Commit to it. All right, my friends. Thank you so much for tuning in. You know we love you. We appreciate you. And we will be back with you again very, very soon. Your environment shapes everything, your thoughts, your health, your energy, but most people never question the invisible field they live in. We did, and that's when FLFE found us. It's not a product, it's a field of pure life force energy that lifts everything it touches. We now live in it 24/7, and we would love to invite you to experience it too. Start your free 15-day trial now. No pressure, no strings attached. Just the truth, resonance, and peace.